The following is a continuation of the story left off in January 1989. Ken had just received a bill from college. It took his family by surprise, leaving his father to have to dip into savings to help Ken pay it. The class he had for the spring semester includes a communications class on TV and media, ethics, a computer class, and New Testament themes. He had Terrence Gould, a bearded man who wore glasses in his 30s or 40s, for the TV and media class, Mr. Gomez for the computer class, Alan Jarrett, who headed Catholic Charities, as his ethics teacher, and Father Frank Pichkovsky for New Testament themes. Meanwhile, he was also working full-time at the hotel. He was no longer in the laundry and strictly did banquet setup. He was working with the Chalmers by his side, with Larry Jansen as their boss. He also had gotten elected as the incoming master counselor of his DeMolay chapter. This meant that he would be responsible for planning the turnout and coordination of the night's installation, with the assistance of chapter dad Marion Turner. The night went pretty well, but with a lower turnout compared to the year before when he was simply appointed as chaplain. The thing that made the difference, now that he started college in Pennsylvania, is that he can now use his own car, his 1977 Dodge Aspen, and not have to rely on rides from his dad or sister. The car gave Ken a sense of independence, getting him a chance to explore the roads he had access to. He was venturing all the way up to Philadelphia spontaneously. He also got to know the Rand McNally Road Atlas, and learned to see what was over the Maryland border whenever time allowed. The car drove well and safely. Still, with all the independence to travel came all the challenges of driving, like having to handle different winter road conditions and having to maneuver around parking lots. Ken found himself cited for a hit and run for bumping into a parked car, with no one in it. He fled without leaving a note, thinking the damage was not noticeable. It was in the parking lot of the Neumann College campus. This happened around Valentine's Day. The car hit a Dodge Daytona. A day later, Ken received a call from the Delco Police Department, being informed of the citation. The hit and run was apparently reported to them after all. The consequence of it required Ken to appear with his dad at headquarters to answer for the citation. "Just throw yourself to the mercy of the court," his dad said. He said that to point out that there was no point in denying it. Just pleading guilty was the simplest and cheapest way to handle the process. They both showed up in person to determine the penalty, sitting next to a gentleman who was the officer in charge. Ken's fine was $127. "You realize if you had have just reported this or left a note, you wouldn't have had to go through this, right? I personally never liked these processes, but I'm doing this to punish you properly," the police officer said. There was concern that Ken may have to do time, but fortunately, the situation didn't call for it. "I've been here 16 years, and no one's ever gone to jail from what I've seen. Maybe if there had have been a person inside," the cop added. Ken shared the experience with his coworkers, including Larry. They were shocked to find out that this happened to him. "In some instances, it's worse than a misdemeanor," Michael said. "That's interesting. If that's the case, will you all still love me?" Ken asked. "Whoa, get the hell out of here," he said with a laugh. "I'm kidding," Mike for a while would say to Ken when leaving. "All right, Ken. See ya later, boss man. Stay out of trouble. Don't be hit in any more cars." The shift work at this job involved those kinds of shifts where workers could not get home until the job was completed. Easy days meant mostly resetting rooms. Harder and longer days meant more extensive overhaul of setups, with entirely different groups, table styles, and arrangements. They worked closely with the catering staff, and these were mostly ladies, one of whom used to be Ken's cafeteria lady at Cedar Lane Elementary. She was German, with a son who attended his high school also. "The faster we get done, the sooner we can go," Jack Chalmers said. The hotel was undergoing new management. Things actually got hectic, and started interfering with Ken's school life and DeMolay responsibilities. He found himself suddenly stuck with the nighttime responsibilities, and was often the last one to go. The last job duty of the shift was to sweep and mop the kitchen. Ken rushed through this duty once when it was getting very late. The first person to confront him on this mistake was Jesse, the older Chalmers brother. "Yo, Ken, how come you didn't mop up that floor right? It looked like shit. You couldn't take an extra minute to check the mop and do it right. You can't leave us with shit like that," he said. "I just forgot to look," Ken said. Things were getting different around there as it seemed like a hostile takeover of new management. At college, Ken's grades were very low and close to failing. While some classes were interesting, it was hard to do well in that he had to get by with little awake time, and without textbooks, he didn't bother purchasing them right away as they were expensive. Communications class required keeping a viewing log of programs he watched on television for about 2 months. This was a small part of his grade. For a major project in this class, he had to pay a visit to a local station. His choice was to reach out to the PBS affiliate which Newborough had access to. His goal was to obtain information behind the scenes activities through use of their public files. They permitted him access to their files at the office for his class project. For his project on sportscasting, he attempted to reach out to Don Tollefson and Gary Papa for questions regarding that. Unfortunately, he couldn't reach them at the right time, just missing them after they left. Ken joked after this that it proved his point. It's true for news anchors. As Dennis Miller says at the end of Weekend Update, guess what? That's the news, and I am out of here. Regardless of falling short, Ken still managed to get a B for that project. In the class on New Testament themes, they learned about the books and epistles of the New Testament. In this class, Ken selected an oral presentation assignment by randomly selecting infancy narratives. He delivered well but only got a C. In ethics class, he learned of concepts such as relativism, egoism, utilitarianism, etc. Also in this class they discussed things like whether people like Ted Bundy or other convicted murderers had lives that were valuable. The responses from many students was that you give up your value when you commit a serious crime like murder. Class discussions, which was a struggle for Ken, usually costed him satisfactory grades. At home, work, and outside the classroom. Back at work, they had hired some help for Ken, a young guy who went to school with him in 6th grade at Browning Junior High, the same school where he dealt with Ralphie Copeland. Kurt Patty was the new guy. Ken remembered him as being skinnier and wavy hair, but this time his head was more of a buzz cut. He seemed like a faster learner than Ken in his duties, but one day, he went missing. Mike Chalmers asked Ken about it. I don't know where he is. Mike went into a state of panic. I'm gonna be one pissed off motherfucker if we don't find him, he said. Ironically, this wasn't even Mike's department. He didn't work in banquet setups. His main job responsibilities were in the kitchen. He tried to help Ken out by having him call Larry. Ken, get Larry on the phone, and tell him that Kurt Patty has left and that you're left here with a lot of work, and don't know what you're doing. Move along, boss. During Mike's efforts to improvise a plan, he got frustrated on the ballroom setups, shouting what the fuck. He threw his hands in the hair when, to everyone's relief, Kurt came running back in. Dude, Mike said, I had to run home. Because my mom had locked herself out of the house. Kurt explained. The crisis was averted. Still, it would be frustrating to be left with so much work late at night. Ken and Kurt would have to refer to lists left by Jesse of rooms that needed prepared or reset. They struggled to get it done in a timely manner, and it made them tired and late in getting it done. Also, when they did get it done, the Chalmers brothers were critical of how well it was done. Often they micromanaged Ken by his ways of doing things, like a nagging parent pushing a kid to do chores. Ken would always fall short in doing things their way. Meanwhile, with finals getting underway, Ken received a call from one of his professors, Terry Gould. He explained to Ken that his term paper was technically plagiarized. There were many quotes and statements which were not cited properly in the end. So I returned the paper to your student mailbox marked with what needs to be corrected. I figured I should inform of this, because without the changes, you can't pass the course, Terry said. Ken looked over the requirements upon retrieving them with the returned paper from his mailbox. Looking over Terry's request, he found himself too confused by how to paraphrase, without citing every single word. Unable to determine the right format and bibliography, he simply gave up and settled for the failure grade. From there he decided that communications was not the right major for him. In ethics class, they took up topics that involved hot-button issues, and students were expected to do an oral presentation on the topic they chose, or were assigned, whether it be abortion, discrimination, which Ken had as his topic, and capital punishment. At home and work and outside the classroom, Ken was appreciating his freedom more. The one setback at this time was his crazy hours at the hotel job. When he was free, he took time to drive up and down the interstate with no particular place to go. He noticed many challenges to maintaining his car. For example, his car radio was getting loose and disconnected, sometimes even during a good song such as Richard Marx's hit song Satisfied. Ken would need his brother Jake to see if he could fix it. He could restore the wiring, but only temporarily until it broke again. One big spontaneous trip Ken decided to take on his own, after the dreadful semester was over, was a drive up to New York City, with a road map, money, and food, all by himself. It was May 27th, a day he was off, and the 6th anniversary of the day he asked Kristen out in 7th grade. He was successfully moving away from the obsession with Kristen, and focused on finding another girl during this time period. During this trip, He listened to radio stations that played Bette Midler, New Kids on the Block, and Donny Osmond's latest hit. He got through many tolls, which included a ticket to get off the turnpike. He traveled over the George Washington Bridge, having to pay $3 to the toll worker, who had to grab it firmly into his hand in order to let Ken pass. Ken paid to much loose change which he had gathered up. He could see the Manhattan skyline, and ended up traveling mostly through the Bronx. Mom and Dad would kill me if they knew I was here, he thought to himself. He managed to get home safely, but with much of the day shot and consumed. Back home, one could see Ken putting an effort into trying to meet a girl. With a busy spring of work, college, the church youth group with Gus, serving as master counselor in Demolay, and sponsoring Winnie Bacchus's son Peter for his confirmation, he wondered what he was thinking taking on all of these things. Nevertheless, he found time to go to a club called Pulsations. It had a youth and teen night in which Ken found himself having to bring Amy, his niece, and her friend Angela. They were at the age where they were considered tweens. They got there one night for the first time ever. Ken split up from them, and found a girl to talk to for a casual, but awkward conversation. She had buxom blonde hair, high heels, and a short dress on. Sitting at a bar, he asked her questions to try to break the ice. "Hi," he said. "So, how are you? Do you happen to know what time this place closes?" 11, she said, with her voice drowned out by the music. "You come here often?" he asked. "Not too much," she answered. "Can I get you a drink?" But she was already distracted, and had gotten one herself, turning away from Ken. Apparently she did not hear him offer the drink. He asked another girl, "Do you want to dance?" "No thank you," she said, nodding her head. Ken then decided to just get up, and leave the area. Once while in the lobby, away from the dance floor area, a group of girls approached Ken. They were very thin, pale, with tattoos, and smoking cigarettes. "Hey, there. Excuse me," one of them said to Ken. "Me and my friends here were wondering if we could suck your dick." "Are you serious?" Ken asked. "Yeah. I'd really like to suck your dick." Ken said in a knee-jerk reaction. He then tried to humor them. "I don't know. First, we need to know how much money you have," said the first girl. "About $22 or $23 here," Ken answered.